The moment Alexander Kane refused to shake her hand, I don't shake hands with staff. He sealed a fate worth $4 billion in lost dreams, but gained something far more valuable than money. Welcome back, storytellers. You know what I love most about this community? We're all here for the same reason. We believe in the power of a story that changes how you see the world. Today's story, it's about pride, prejudice, and a $4 billion lesson that proves sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest transformations. Before we dive in, smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. Tomorrow's story is already giving me chills, and you definitely don't want to miss it. And hey, drop your location in the comments. I love seeing our global story family grow. Now let's get into it. The marble floors of the Meridian Investment Summit gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each footstep echoing through the grandest ballroom Manhattan had ever conceived. 200 of the world's most powerful financial minds moved through the space like chess pieces positioning for the ultimate game. What do you think happens when someone's prejudice costs them everything? Share your thoughts below. Have you ever made assumptions that came back to haunt you? Alexander Kane stood at the far end of the ballroom, his presence commanding attention without effort. At 42, he had inherited not just the Kane financial empire, but the cold confidence that came with never being told no. His platinum watch caught the light as he adjusted his tie, a gesture born of habit rather than need. Everything about him was perfectly curated. The Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars, the silver hair that had turned distinguished rather than gray, and the invisible wall that separated him from everyone he deemed beneath his status. He surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of a predator. Tonight wasn't about networking, it was about acquiring. 3 companies hung in the balance, each requiring the kind of capital injection that only 5 people in this room could provide. Alexander intended to corner each of those 5 before the evening's end. "Sir?" A young waiter appeared at his elbow, offering champagne from a silver tray. Alexander didn't even glance at the young man. "I don't drink from trays held by staff. Bring me a bottle of your finest to my table. Personally." The waiter's face flushed, but he nodded and disappeared into the crowd. It was a small moment, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but it revealed everything about Alexander Kane. In his world, there were 2 kinds of people, those who mattered and those who served. Meanwhile, across the city, Zara Williams sat in the back of her modest Uber, watching the Manhattan skyline blur past the window. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated, and carried a leather portfolio that had seen better days. To any observer, she looked like countless other young professionals heading to yet another corporate event, hoping to make connections that might advance her career. But appearances, as Zara had learned long ago, were the world's greatest deception. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "The Meridian contracts are ready for signature. $4.2 billion cleared for transfer. Just say the word." Zara smiled softly, remembering her grandmother's words. "Baby girl, the most powerful position in the world is the one where nobody sees you coming." She had built her investment empire deliberately in the shadows, using shell companies and trusted intermediaries, avoiding the spotlight that made men like Alexander Kane feel important. While they posed for magazine covers and gave keynote speeches about their success, she quietly acquired the companies they desperately wanted, funded the startups they overlooked, and built a network of loyalty that money alone could never purchase. Tonight, she was hunting too, but not for companies or capital. She was looking for someone worthy of her trust, someone who could see beyond surface appearances to recognize real value. Someone who understood that true power came not from what you owned, but from what you chose to do with what you had. The Uber pulled up to the Meridian Hotel, and Zara checked her reflection one last time. Perfect, completely forgettable. She tucked her portfolio under her arm and stepped into the New York evening, ready to discover what kind of man Alexander Kane really was beneath his expensive facade. As she walked through the hotel's marble lobby toward the ballroom, she passed a young waiter struggling with a heavy tray of champagne bottles. Without thinking, she paused. "Here, let me help you with that," she said gently, steadying the tray as he regained his balance. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Most people just walk past." We're all just people, Zara replied with a warm smile. Nobody's too important to lend a hand. The waiter straightened, something shifting in his posture. Are you here for the investment summit? Something like that, Zara said, checking her watch. Better get going. Wouldn't want to keep anyone waiting. As she disappeared into the ballroom, the waiter watched her go, wondering if she knew she had just restored his faith in humanity with 5 simple words. We're all just people. The stage was set. 2 worlds were about to collide in a way that would change everything both Alexander and Zara thought they knew about power, prejudice, and the unexpected places where love could take root. The marble floors had witnessed countless negotiations, deals worth billions, handshakes that moved markets. But they had never seen anything like what was about to unfold when pride met power, and both discovered that the heart's currency was more valuable than all the gold in Manhattan. The ballroom hummed with the energy of 200 power brokers, but Alexander Kane moved through it like a shark cutting through still water. He had identified his first target, the mysterious representative from Omega Capital, rumored to have unlimited liquidity for the right investment opportunities. According to his sources, Omega's representative would be carrying a distinctive leather portfolio and would be approaching potential partners personally rather than waiting to be approached. Alexander's eyes scanned the crowd methodically. There, near the catering station, a young black woman in a simple dress, leather portfolio tucked under her arm, appeared to be studying the room with the same calculated interest he recognized in fellow predators. But something was wrong with the picture. She was standing too close to the service area, too comfortable in spaces where serious money didn't linger. Alexander's lip curled slightly. Probably some assistant sent to scout for her boss, carrying documents she didn't understand, hoping to catch a glimpse of real power. Still, the portfolio matched the description. Better to be thorough. Zara felt his approach before she saw him. The way conversations shifted around him, how people unconsciously stepped aside to clear his path. She turned, meeting his gaze directly, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her composure. Excuse me, Alexander said, his voice carrying the particular brand of charm reserved for people he considered useful but inferior. I'm Alexander Kane, Kane Financial. I believe you may be here representing Omega Capital. Zara set down her champagne glass carefully, studying his face. Everything about his posture screamed superiority. The way he stood just slightly too close, the manner in which his eyes swept over her dismissively before returning to her face, the subtle way he positioned himself to look down at her. I am, she replied simply, extending her hand for what should have been the most basic human courtesy. Alexander's eyes dropped to her outstretched hand, then flicked back to her face with an expression that could have frozen champagne. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and Zara felt every lesson her grandmother had ever taught her about dignity crystallizing in this single moment. I don't shake hands with staff, Alexander said, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby conversations to pause. If Omega Capital is serious about the kind of partnership Kane Financial offers, they'll send someone with actual authority to negotiate. The words hit the air like a physical blow. Around them, the sophisticated murmur of the party faltered as heads turned toward the commotion. Zara felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest. Not new, but always devastating in its ability to reduce her to every stereotype that had ever been whispered behind her back. But this time was different. This time she had more than dignity to draw from. Zara let her hand drop slowly, watching Alexander's face with the steady gaze of someone who had learned to see people's souls in their cruelest moments. She could see it all there, the inherited prejudice, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty that his wealth made him untouchable. You're absolutely right, she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange note that made several nearby investors unconsciously lean closer. Omega Capital should definitely send someone with actual authority. She opened her leather portfolio, not frantically, not defensively, but with the calm precision of someone who had always known this moment would come. Her fingers found the document she needed, a single sheet of letterhead that had the power to move mountains. I'm Zara Williams, she continued, offering him the paper, founder and CEO of Omega Capital. The person you just refused to shake hands with controls $4.2 billion in liquid assets, and as of this morning had been considering Kane Financial for our largest acquisition deal of the year. Alexander's face went through a fascinating series of transformations: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then a creeping horror as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the document, and Zara noticed how the expensive paper seemed to burn his fingers. The Omega Capital letterhead was unmistakable, and beneath it, her signature authorizing the exact amount she had mentioned. But it was the smaller text that made Alexander's breath catch. Conditional offer for 60% acquisition of Kane Financial Empire, pending satisfactory partnership assessment. Around them, the party continued, but their little circle had become an island of stunned silence. The few people close enough to understand what was happening wore expressions of shock and barely concealed fascination. In a world where respect was currency, they had just witnessed someone refuse to shake hands with $4 billion. This is... Alexander started, then stopped, his usual confidence completely shattered. Impossible, Zara suggested gently, because someone who looks like me couldn't possibly control that kind of money? Because I was standing near the catering table instead of holding court in the center of the room? Because I drive an Uber instead of a limousine? Each question landed like a precisely aimed arrow, and Alexander felt something inside him crumble with each hit. This wasn't just about a lost business deal, though the magnitude of that loss was beginning to crystallize in his mind. This was about every assumption he had ever made, every moment of casual cruelty, every time he had looked at another human being and decided they didn't matter. Zara, he whispered, and her name felt foreign on his tongue, weighted with a respect he should have offered from the beginning. She folded the document back into her portfolio with the same care she had used to remove it. When she looked at him again, her eyes held something that was neither anger nor satisfaction, but something far more complex, disappointment mixed with what might have been pity. "The offer expires at midnight," she said simply. "Not because I'm vindictive, but because Omega Capital partners only with organizations that understand the value of treating every person with basic dignity. We've found it's an excellent predictor of how they'll treat our money, our employees, and our trust." She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at him one last time. "For what it's worth, Mr. Kane, my research suggested you might be different, that underneath all the posturing, you might actually be someone worth knowing. I hope, for your sake more than mine, that I wasn't completely wrong." And with that, she walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone in a crowd of 200 people, holding the ruins of everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and his own worth. The marble floors beneath his feet had never felt less solid. Alexander stood frozen in the ballroom for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, watching Zara's figure disappear into the crowd. The document in his hands felt like it was burning through his skin, each word a testament to the magnitude of his catastrophic mistake. $4.2 billion, gone, in the time it took to refuse a handshake. "No," he whispered to himself, then louder. "No, this is insane." He strode toward the bar, his mind racing to construct a defense against the impossible reality crushing down on him. There had to be an explanation, a setup, some kind of elaborate prank or test that the universe couldn't possibly be cruel enough to make real. "Whiskey," he demanded from the bartender. "The good stuff. Make it a double." As the amber liquid burned down his throat, Alexander's business mind kicked into survival mode. He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed his head of research. "Thompson, I need everything you can find on Omega Capital and someone named Zara Williams. I need it in 10 minutes. "Sir, it's past 11 p.m. 10 minutes, Thompson, or you're fired." While he waited, Alexander's eyes swept the ballroom, looking for Zara's familiar figure. She was nowhere to be seen, but he caught fragments of whispered conversations around him. "Did you see what just happened with Kane? Who was that woman? I heard her mention billions." The whispers felt like knives. In a world where reputation was everything, social humiliation was a death sentence. Alexander's grip tightened on his phone as his pride mounted a desperate defense. This was her fault, he told himself. She had manipulated the situation. What kind of legitimate businesswoman dressed like a nobody and lurked around catering tables? If she really controlled that kind of money, why wasn't she announced? Why no security detail? Why no entourage? His phone buzzed. Thompson's voice was tight with what sounded like panic. Sir, Jesus Christ, Alexander. Omega Capital is real. They're not just real, they're invisible. Shell companies, offshore holdings, private equity moves that happen so quietly we never even track them. This Zara Williams, she's been buying companies right out from under us for 3 years. The Meridian deal you wanted? She already owns 30% of it. The tech startup in Brooklyn? Heron, that logistics company in Queens you were eyeing? She bought it last Tuesday. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible. We would have known. We always know. Not if she didn't want us to know. Thompson's voice carried a grudging admiration. Sir, she's not just rich. She's smart rich. The kind of smart that makes our intelligence networks look like amateur hour. And according to my contacts at Goldman Sachs, the Kane acquisition offer is legitimate. She's been circling us for months. The phone slipped from Alexander's numb fingers, clattering to the marble floor. Around him, the party continued, but he felt like he was drowning in plain sight. 3 floors above the ballroom, Zara sat alone in her hotel suite, staring out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She had shed her simple black dress for comfortable pajamas and wrapped herself in the hotel's plush robe, but comfort felt impossible. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table, cursor blinking in the subject line of an email draft. Omega Capital, Kane Financial Acquisition, offer withdrawn. All she had to do was type the message and press send. Alexander Kane would wake up tomorrow to discover that his arrogance had cost him everything. His investors would flee. His company would crumble. Justice would be served. So why couldn't she type the words? Zara rose and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. 23 floors below, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, each light representing someone's dreams, struggles, hopes. Just another rich white man who thinks money makes him God, she murmured to her reflection. You've dealt with 1,000 of them. But even as she said it, something nagged at her. In that moment when he had first approached her, before the cruelty emerged, she had seen something else in his eyes, a flicker of loneliness, recognition. It had lasted barely a second, but she had built her fortune on reading people's tells, and Alexander Kane had revealed more than he intended. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed her grandmother's number. Hey, Grandma Rose. Baby girl, you sound troubled. What's weighing on your heart? Zara smiled despite herself. Even at 87, Rose Williams could read her granddaughter's emotional state through a phone line across 3 states. I met someone tonight, someone who disappointed me. Disappointed you, or disappointed the little girl who still hopes people will surprise her? The question hit deeper than Zara expected. She sank into the suite's armchair, suddenly feeling exhausted. He looked at me and saw exactly what I expected him to see. Nothing. Nobody. Just another black woman in a room where I didn't belong. And what did you do about it? I showed him his mistake, humiliated him the way he humiliated me. I have the power to destroy his entire world, Grandma, and part of me wants to do it. Rose was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 7 decades of wisdom. Power without mercy is just revenge, baby girl. And revenge never made anybody whole. The question isn't whether you can destroy him. It's whether destroying him will build the kind of world you want to live in. After they hung up, Zara stared at her laptop screen for another hour, cursor still blinking in that empty subject line. Outside her window, the city continued its endless dance of ambition and dreams, while inside she wrestled with a choice that would define not just Alexander Kane's future, but her own soul. What would you do if someone's prejudice gave you the power to destroy them completely? Drop a comment below. Is mercy always the right choice, or do some people need to learn the hard way? Down in the ballroom, Alexander had returned to his penthouse suite, but sleep was impossible. He sat in his study, surrounded by portraits of Kane family patriarchs, each one seeming to judge him for the catastrophic failure that threatened to end their dynasty. The offer would expire at midnight. In less than an hour, $4 billion would disappear forever, and with it, everything the Kane name had built over 4 generations. But for the first time in his life, Alexander found himself wondering if losing his empire might be exactly what he deserved. At 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Omega Capital's offer would expire forever, Manhattan's electrical grid buckled under the weight of an unexpected autumn storm that had swept in from the Atlantic with the fury of a hurricane. The Meridian Hotel's emergency lighting flickered on as the main power died, bathing the marble lobby in an eerie amber glow. Outside, rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, while wind howled between the skyscrapers like a living thing seeking shelter. Zara had been standing in the lobby, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, finger hovering over the send button of her withdrawal email when the lights went out. She had come downstairs with a decision crystallizing in her mind. Not mercy, not revenge, but something more complex. She wanted to look Alexander Kane in the eyes one more time before she chose his fate. Now, as emergency generators hummed to life and hotel staff scrambled to manage 200 displaced summit guests, that choice seemed suspended in the surreal amber twilight of a powerless Manhattan. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hotel manager's voice crackled over a battery-powered megaphone. "Due to the severity of the storm and downed power lines, the city has issued a shelter-in-place order. All elevators are non-operational for safety reasons. We're converting the lobby and ballroom into temporary accommodation areas. I apologize for the inconvenience." Zara found herself swept along with the crowd of confused, overdressed investment elite as hotel staff distributed blankets and pillows. The absurdity of the situation struck her. Billionaires and power brokers reduced to camping in a hotel lobby like refugees from their own importance. She claimed a spot near the windows, setting her laptop bag down as a makeshift pillow, when a familiar voice cut through the din of complaints and nervous laughter. "This is unacceptable. I don't care about your shelter order. I need to get to my suite. I have critical business to conclude." Alexander Kane stood at the front desk, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from stress. The desk clerk, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, was doing her best to remain professional under his verbal assault. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but the elevators are completely shut down. It's not safe. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what this delay is costing me?" Zara watched the scene unfold, seeing something she hadn't noticed before. Beneath Alexander's arrogance was desperation, raw, animal panic. The kind that came not from inconvenience, but from watching your entire world crumble in real time. The young desk clerk's composure finally cracked. "Sir, I'm just trying to do my job. Everyone's stuck here until morning. Your job is to serve your guests, not make excuses." That's when Zara stood up. She approached the desk slowly, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. She had kicked off her heels hours ago, and without them, she seemed smaller, less imposing, but somehow more present. "Mr. Kane," she said quietly. Alexander spun around, his face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and something that might have been relief. In the amber emergency lighting, with his perfect facade finally cracked, he looked younger, more human. "Zara!" Her name came out as barely a whisper. The desk clerk looked between them, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. "Do you two know each other?" "We had a business disagreement earlier," Zara said, never taking her eyes off Alexander. "But right now, we're just two people stuck in the same storm." She turned to the clerk with a gentle smile. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Jessica," the young woman replied, visibly relaxing. "Jessica, you're doing an amazing job under impossible circumstances. Why don't you take a break? I think Mr. Kane understands the situation now." Jessica shot Alexander a grateful look and disappeared into the back office. The lobby continued to buzz with displaced guests, but around Alexander and Zara, a strange bubble of quiet had formed. "You don't have to," Alexander started. "Help you? No, I don't." Zara's voice was matter-of-fact, neither hostile nor friendly, "but that doesn't mean I won't." They stood there for a moment, Two powerful people stripped of their usual armor, surrounded by the chaos of a natural disaster that had reduced everyone to their most basic humanity. The offer expires in... Alexander checked his watch, the familiar gesture now carrying desperate weight. 11 minutes. I know. Are you going to withdraw it? Zara studied his face in the amber light. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. For the first time since their disastrous introduction, she was seeing Alexander Kane the person, not Alexander Kane the persona. I don't know, she said honestly. I came down here to decide. And then the storm hit. She gestured toward the windows where rain continued to streak down like tears. Funny how the universe has timing. Alexander laughed, a sound so unexpected and genuine that several nearby guests looked over in surprise. Universe? I would have said cruel fate. Maybe they're the same thing. Without really deciding to, they found themselves walking toward Zara's claimed spot by the windows. Alexander hesitated when she settled onto her makeshift bed of hotel blankets. He started. Sit, Alexander. Your pride already cost you $4 billion tonight. Don't let it cost you a chance to rest too. He sat, careful to maintain distance, but close enough that their conversation remained private. Outside, lightning illuminated the storm-dark city in brief, stark snapshots. Can I ask you something? He said after a moment. You can ask. Why Omega Capital? Why the mystery? If you have that kind of power, why hide it? Zara was quiet for so long that Alexander thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain. Because the moment people see a young black woman claiming to control billions, they start looking for reasons why it can't be true. Looking for the man behind the curtain, or the family money, or the luck, or the scandal. They need it to make sense in their world, where people like me don't get to be people like you. People like me, Alexander repeated, tasting the words like medicine. Powerful, respected, assumed to belong in any room you enter. She turned to look at him directly. When's the last time someone looked at you and immediately assumed you were the help? Alexander opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The question hung between them like a challenge. Never, he admitted finally. Never, Zara agreed. That's the difference between your power and mine. Yours announces itself. Mine has to prove itself, every single day, to every single person who matters. The lobby around them had grown quieter as exhausted guests settled in for an uncomfortable night. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across marble floors that had never been meant for sleeping. I'm sorry, Alexander said suddenly. For what, specifically? For seeing what I expected to see instead of who you actually are. For refusing to shake your hand. He gestured helplessly. For being exactly the kind of person I was raised to be. Zara's phone buzzed. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the offer expired. She looked at the screen, then at Alexander, then back at the screen. Her finger hovered over the send button that would make her withdrawal email official. Alexander, she said quietly, if I give you another chance, not just with the deal, but with basic human decency, what would you do with it? He met her eyes, and in the amber emergency lighting, surrounded by the democracy of a natural disaster that had reduced everyone to their most essential selves, Alexander Kane made the first truly honest statement of his adult life. I don't know, he said, but I'd like the chance to find out. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating both their faces in stark clarity. Between them, Zara's phone showed 11:59 p.m. 1 minute left to decide the fate of everything Alexander had ever known. And in that minute, something neither of them expected began to unfold. Not business, not revenge, not even forgiveness, but the first fragile possibility of seeing each other as fully human. At exactly midnight, Zara's phone screen went dark as the battery finally died. The Omega Capital offer had officially expired, taking with it the largest acquisition deal in Kane Financial's history. But neither of them mentioned it. Instead, they sat in the strange intimacy that disaster creates, watching Manhattan's powerless skyline through rain-streaked windows, while 200 of the world's most powerful people slept fitfully on marble floors around them. Tell me about your father, Zara said suddenly. Alexander's entire body went rigid. What? Your father. In my research, every article about Kane Financial mentions the legacy, the tradition, the family dynasty, but they never quote him, never show pictures of you together. For a family business built on reputation, that's unusual. Alexander was quiet for so long that Zara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old shame. Harrison Kane died when I was 28. Heart attack. Massive stress from a deal gone wrong. He stared out at the storm. The last words he ever spoke to me were, "You're not half the man you think you are, and twice the disappointment I raised you to be." The confession hung in the amber-lit space between them. Zara waited, sensing there was more. I was supposed to take over gradually, learn the business properly. Instead, I inherited everything overnight. The company, the pressure, the impossible standard of being a Kane. Alexander's hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. Do you know what it's like to spend 14 years trying to prove yourself to a dead man? Tell me about the deal, Zara said gently. The one that killed him. Alexander laughed bitterly. Ironically appropriate, given tonight. Dad was negotiating with a small investment firm, family-owned, generational wealth, but they were different. The founder was a black man from Detroit who'd built something extraordinary from nothing. Dad couldn't see past his own prejudices long enough to recognize genius when it was offered to him. Zara felt her breath catch. What happened? Dad insulted him, questioned his credentials, his backing, even suggested he might be fronting for someone else. The man walked away, took his revolutionary trading algorithm to Goldman Sachs instead. Within 6 months, that algorithm had generated over $2 billion in profits. Dad spent the rest of his life knowing he'd thrown away the future of Kane Financial because he couldn't shake hands with a black man. The parallel was so obvious, so devastatingly clear, that both of them felt it like a physical blow. And you learned from his mistake, Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. I learned to be exactly like him, Alexander whispered. Every lesson, every crucial business insight, every way of evaluating people and opportunities, I absorbed it all. He shaped me into his perfect heir, someone who would never make his mistakes again. Mistakes like treating people with basic human decency? Alexander flinched. He called it maintaining appropriate boundaries, said that the moment you start seeing staff as equals, you lose the respect necessary to lead. That charity was weakness, and kindness was just another word for being taken advantage of. Zara absorbed this, feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So tonight, when you refused to shake my hand, I was being the son he trained me to be, following every lesson he ever taught me about knowing my place in the hierarchy and making sure everyone else knew theirs too. Alexander's voice broke slightly. I was honoring his memory by repeating his worst mistake. They sat in silence as rain continued to assault the windows. Around them, the lobby had grown quieter, though the occasional cough or rustle of blankets reminded them they weren't truly alone. Can I tell you something? Zara said finally. Alexander nodded. My grandmother, the woman who raised me, she cleaned office buildings at night to put me through school. 20 years of mopping floors in buildings like this one, emptying trash cans in boardrooms where men like your father made decisions that shaped the world. She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller in the vast space. She used to come home at 6 in the morning, exhausted, smelling like industrial cleaner, and find me at the kitchen table doing homework. And every single morning, she'd sit down next to me and say, "Baby girl, never forget, the hands that clean these buildings are the same hands that built this country. Respect isn't something you earn by being important. It's something you give because you're human." Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. She sounds like an incredible woman. She is. But here's the thing that might surprise you. She wasn't trying to make me angry at people like you. She was trying to make sure I never became someone who forgot where I came from. Someone who had so much power that I stopped seeing the people who made that power possible. Zara turned to face him fully. Your father's mistake wasn't just losing a business deal, Alexander. It was raising a son to believe that a person's worth could be measured by their position in a hierarchy that he didn't even create. Then what am I supposed to do? The question came out raw, desperate. Everything I am, everything I know about being successful, it's all built on his foundation. If I tear that down, what's left? Maybe, Zara said softly. That's exactly what you need to find out. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, though rain still traced silver paths down the dark windows. Inside, Alexander Kane sat surrounded by sleeping billionaires and felt more alone than he had since the day his father died. But for the first time in 14 years, that loneliness didn't feel like weakness. It felt like possibility. Zara, he said quietly, the offer that expired at midnight, we'll figure that out tomorrow, she interrupted. Right now, we're just two people stuck in a storm, trying to figure out how to be better than the people who made us. She settled back against her makeshift pillow, pulling a hotel blanket up to her chin. Get some sleep, Alexander. Tomorrow we start over. As she closed her eyes, Alexander remained sitting upright, staring out at the dark city and wrestling with a question that would have been impossible 12 hours ago. What kind of man did he want to be when the storm finally passed? For the first time since his father's death, the answer didn't seem predetermined. Alexander woke to the sound of quiet laughter. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan, pale light filtering through the hotel's massive windows and mixing with the emergency lighting to create something almost beautiful. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under a sky the color of pearl. He turned toward the sound and found Zara sitting cross-legged on her blanket, sharing coffee and pastries with the young desk clerk, Jessica, who had apparently returned with the morning shift. The two women were deep in conversation, and something about the easy way they spoke, no hierarchy, no performance, just two people connecting, made Alexander's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. So I told him, "Sir, your Mercedes may cost more than my annual salary, but it still can't fly," Jessica was saying, and Zara laughed, a real laugh, uninhibited and warm. "People think money can bend the laws of physics," Zara replied, accepting a paper cup of coffee. "I once had a client demand I make his investment mature in 3 months instead of 3 years. When I explained that's not how compound interest works, he asked to speak to my supervisor." "What did you tell him?" "That he was looking at her." Zara's smile had a mischievous edge. Took him 20 minutes to process that. Men like that, they need their world to make sense in very specific ways. Alexander stood slowly, his body stiff from sleeping on marble. As he approached, both women looked up, and he felt the familiar flutter of social anxiety that had plagued him since childhood, the fear of not belonging, of saying the wrong thing, of being judged and found wanting. "Good morning," he said carefully. "Morning," Zara replied, her tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Jessica brought coffee and breakfast for everyone. There's some left if you want it." Jessica handed him a cup and a Danish, studying his face with the curiosity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You're Alexander Kane, right? The guy who made a spectacular ass of himself last night," Alexander finished, surprising himself with his honesty. "Yes, that's me." Jessica blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "Oh, well, we all have bad days." "Some worse than others," Alexander agreed, settling onto the floor near them, but not presuming to join their circle. "I owe you an apology too, Jessica. I was rude to you last night, and you didn't deserve that." "You were scared," Jessica said simply. "People say terrible things when they're scared. Doesn't make it right, but I get it." Zara watched this exchange with interest, seeing a side of Alexander she hadn't expected, the capacity for genuine remorse, the willingness to apologize to someone who couldn't benefit his business empire. "So what happens now?" Jessica asked, looking between them. "I mean, the power's back on, elevators are running, everyone's going back to their normal lives." "Normal," Alexander repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign. He looked at Zara. "I'm not sure I remember what that looks like anymore." Around them, the lobby was stirring to life as guests gathered their belongings and prepared to return to their suites. The emergency was over, but something had fundamentally shifted in the strange bubble of intimacy that the storm had created. "Can I ask you something, Zara?" Alexander said. "Last night, when your phone died at midnight, you could have plugged it in anywhere. Hotel staff would have found you a charger in seconds. But you didn't. Zara was quiet for a moment, swirling the coffee in her cup. No, I didn't. Why? Because, she said slowly, I realized that whether the offer expired wasn't the important question anymore. The important question was whether we could have a conversation without a $4 billion sword hanging over our heads. Jessica looked between them, clearly sensing she was witnessing something significant, but not understanding what. I should probably get back to work, she said tactfully. Jessica, Zara called as the young woman started to leave. Thank you for the coffee, for the kindness, for reminding me that the best conversations happen when people just treat each other like human beings. After Jessica left, Alexander and Zara found themselves alone in a space that had held 200 people just hours before. The morning light streaming through the windows made everything feel fresh, possible, like the world had been reborn overnight. I have a confession, Alexander said suddenly. Just one? He smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I researched you before the party last night. My people found next to nothing, which should have been impossible for someone with your supposed resources. It made me suspicious. Suspicious of what? That you were too good to be true, that someone was playing an elaborate prank on Alexander Kane, setting me up to look foolish. He shook his head. It never occurred to me that you might be exactly who you claim to be, and that my inability to find you was the whole point. I told you, people like me have to be careful about visibility. No, it's more than that. Alexander turned to face her fully. You built something incredible while men like me weren't paying attention. While we were posturing and competing and making sure everyone could see how important we were, you were quietly becoming more powerful than any of us. He paused, something like wonder in his voice. You didn't need our approval or recognition or invitation into our little boys' club. You just did the work. Zara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not triumph or vindication, but something rarer. Being truly seen for what she had accomplished, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Want to know a secret? She said. Half the time I felt like I was pretending. Like eventually someone would figure out I didn't belong in boardrooms and corner offices, that I was just my grandmother's granddaughter playing dress-up in a world too big for me. Imposter syndrome, Alexander said. I know it well. But you inherited an empire I never earned, a reputation I didn't build, and expectations I could never meet. He laughed, but it was gentler now, less bitter. Do you know how many nights I've laid awake wondering if my father was right? If I really wasn't half the man I thought I was? They sat in the growing morning light, two powerful people who had spent years feeling like imposters in their own lives, finally seeing themselves reflected in someone else's truth. Zara, Alexander said quietly, regardless of what happens with the business deal, I want you to know, last night changed something in me. I don't know what yet, but something fundamental shifted, and I have you to thank for that. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Alexander glanced at the screen and his face darkened. Thompson, my head of research. He looked at Zara apologetically. I should take this. He's probably panicking about the expired offer. As Alexander answered the call, moving a few steps away for privacy, Zara watched his posture change. The openness that had been growing between them suddenly vanished, replaced by the familiar armor of business Alexander Kane. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read his body language, the way his shoulders tensed, how his free hand clenched into a fist, the sharp edge that crept back into his voice. When he hung up and returned to her, the man she had been connecting with was gone, replaced by someone who looked like a stranger wearing Alexander's face. What's wrong? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Alexander's eyes had gone cold, calculating. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that made her blood run cold. Thompson did some more digging into your background. Deep digging. He paused, and Zara felt the world tilting beneath her. Tell me, Zara, when exactly were you planning to mention that your biggest client is Meridian Dynamics? The same company that destroyed my father's health and drove him to his grave? The words hit like physical blows, and Zara felt every fragile connection they had built dissolving in the harsh light of morning. The storm had passed, But something much more devastating was about to begin. The morning light that had seemed so hopeful moments before now felt harsh and unforgiving, casting sharp shadows across the marble floor between them. Zara's face went through a series of transformations: surprise, understanding, and then something that looked like resignation. Meridian Dynamics, she said quietly. You want to know about Meridian Dynamics? I want to know why you didn't mention that your biggest client is the company that killed my father. Alexander's voice was ice. Was this whole thing a setup? The mysterious approach, the hidden identity even. He gestured at the space around them. Even last night? Zara stood slowly, her movements careful and controlled. You think I orchestrated a citywide power outage to manipulate you into trusting me? I think you're capable of much more than I gave you credit for. The question is whether any of it was real. The accusation hung between them like poison in the air. Around the lobby, hotel staff moved quietly, cleaning up the remnants of the emergency shelter. But Alexander and Zara existed in their own bubble of destruction. Tell me about Meridian, Alexander demanded. Tell me how the company that destroyed everything my father built became your biggest client. Zara's jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse to answer. Then something shifted in her expression. Not surrender, but decision. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, Meridian Dynamics is my largest client. They have been for 2 years. I manage approximately 60% of their investment portfolio, which represents about $1.8 billion of my assets under management. Each word hit Alexander like a physical blow. 60%. Jesus Christ. But here's what your research didn't tell you, Alexander, because your people only look for the information that confirms what you already believe. Zara's voice was gaining strength, building towards something that felt dangerous. Do you know why Meridian came to me? Do you know what their previous investment strategy was? I don't. They were hemorrhaging money through traditional firms like yours, firms that operated exactly like Kane Financial, old boys networks, inherited wisdom, and the absolute certainty that they knew better than everyone else. Her eyes flashed. They came to me because they needed someone who understood what it felt like to be underestimated. Someone who could see value where others saw only risk. Alexander's hands were shaking now, though whether from rage or something else he couldn't tell. You're defending them. The company that what exactly? Zara stepped closer, and there was steel in her voice now. What did Meridian Dynamics actually do to your father, Alexander? Because I've seen your company's financials from that period. I know exactly what happened. They outbid you on 3 separate acquisitions, all fair and square, all above board. Your father lost because he was too proud to compete on merit instead of reputation. The words were like gasoline on a fire. Alexander's composure finally cracked completely. How dare you? How dare you stand there and defend the people who destroyed him? You have no idea what it was like watching him work himself to death, trying to recover from their attacks. Attacks? Zara's laugh was sharp and bitter. You call fair competition an attack? This is exactly what I'm talking about, Alexander. When people like you lose, it's never because you were outplayed. It's always because someone cheated, or attacked, or played dirty. It's never because you simply weren't good enough. The lobby around them had gone quiet, hotel staff and the few remaining guests sensing the explosion happening in their midst. You want to know what I think? Zara continued, her voice rising. I think your father didn't die because Meridian Dynamics was too aggressive. I think he died because he couldn't handle living in a world where he wasn't automatically the most important person in the room, where his name and his money weren't enough to guarantee victory. Stop! Alexander's voice was barely controlled fury. And I think you're exactly the same. Last night, for a few hours, I thought I saw something different in you. I thought maybe you were capable of growth, of change, of seeing past your own privilege long enough to recognize another human being. She shook her head, and there was something like pity in her expression that cut deeper than any anger could have. But the moment you found out I had a professional relationship with a company that beat your father at his own game, you reverted to type. Poor little rich boy, convinced that everyone who doesn't bow down to the Kane name must be plotting against it. What do you think? Is it possible to separate business relationships from personal ones? Or does working with someone's enemy make you an enemy too? Let us know in the comments below. Alexander felt something breaking inside him, something fundamental and irreparable. This was all a game to you, wasn't it? The storm, the conversation, the vulnerability, all of it designed to make me trust you so you could get your claws deeper into what's left of my father's legacy. My claws? Zara's voice went deadly quiet. Is that what you think this is? Some elaborate conspiracy by a black woman to destroy the great Kane dynasty? The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Alexander realized with horror that somewhere in his rage, that was exactly what he had started to believe. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Zara's voice was steady now, surgical in its precision. Because when it came down to it, when you had to choose between believing that I might be a human being worthy of respect or believing that I was exactly the kind of threat your father trained you to see, you chose prejudice, just like he did. She picked up her bag with movements that were unnaturally calm. You know what the really tragic part is, Alexander? For a few hours last night, I actually thought we might be able to build something together. Not just a business relationship, something real, something that could help both of us become better than the people who made us. Zara, wait. But you're right about one thing. This was a setup, not by me, by you. You set yourself up to fail the moment you decided that a successful black woman had to be either your enemy or your pawn. There was never any possibility in your mind that I could just be me. She started walking toward the elevator, then paused and looked back at him one last time. For what it's worth, the Meridian account? I was planning to transition it to another firm next quarter. Too much emotional baggage for both sides to build a healthy working relationship. But now I think I'll keep it. Consider it a reminder that some people never learn from their father's mistakes. They just find new ways to repeat them. The elevator doors opened and Zara stepped inside. As they began to close, Alexander found his voice. What about the acquisition offer? Zara looked at him through the narrowing gap, and her expression was something he would remember for the rest of his life. Not anger, not satisfaction, but profound disappointment. There is no offer anymore, Alexander. There never was, from the moment you decided I wasn't worth a handshake. Everything since then has just been me trying to figure out if you were worth saving. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and Alexander was left standing alone in a lobby that suddenly felt cavernous and cold. Around him, hotel staff continued their cleanup, carefully not looking at the man who had just watched $4 billion and something infinitely more valuable disappear behind steel doors. For the first time since his father's death, Alexander Kane understood exactly what it felt like to lose everything that mattered because of pride. The morning sun continued to rise over Manhattan, but in the Meridian Hotel lobby, it felt like the end of the world. Alexander stood in the empty lobby for exactly 17 minutes after the elevator doors closed, not moving, barely breathing, while hotel staff worked around him like he was a piece of abandoned furniture. 17 minutes to understand that he had just repeated his father's worst mistake with surgical precision. 17 minutes to realize that every assumption he had made about Zara Williams had been filtered through a lens of inherited prejudice so deeply embedded that he hadn't even recognized it as prejudice, just business sense. 17 minutes to confront the devastating possibility that he was exactly the man his father had died believing him to be. Finally, he walked to the elevator, rode up to his penthouse suite, and sat in his study surrounded by portraits of 4 generations of Kane patriarchs. But for the first time in his life, their painted eyes didn't seem judgmental. They seemed ashamed. Alexander pulled out his phone and called Thompson. Sir, thank God. I was worried about how you'd take the Meridian connection, but now that we know she's compromised, we can... Thompson, Alexander's voice was quiet, controlled. I need you to pull all your research on Zara Williams and Omega Capital. Pull it? Sir, we need to use this information to... I need you to pull it and burn it. Every file, every report, every background check. Delete it all. Silence on the other end. Sir, I don't understand. This woman just played you. The Meridian connection proves... The Meridian connection proves that she's a better businesswoman than my father was, and that I'm exactly the kind of man who would destroy something beautiful because it threatened my ego. Alexander hung up before Thompson could respond. He sat alone in his study for 2 hours, staring at a framed photograph on his desk, the last picture taken of him and his father together. They were at a charity gala, both in perfectly tailored tuxedos, both wearing the same expression of casual superiority that Alexander now recognized as his default face. The same expression he had worn when he refused to shake Zara's hand. At noon, he walked out of his building and began walking through Manhattan with no destination in mind. He passed construction workers on their lunch break, street vendors calling out their wares, tourists taking pictures, business people rushing between meetings. For the first time in years, he really looked at them, not as obstacles or background noise, but as human beings with their own dreams, struggles, and dignity. He found himself thinking about Jessica, the desk clerk who had shown him more grace in one night than he had shown anyone in years, about the waiter he had dismissed without a glance, about every person he had walked past without seeing because they didn't exist in his narrow definition of importance, about his father who had died believing that treating people with basic respect was weakness. At 2 p.m., he stopped walking and found himself standing outside a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, miles from his usual Manhattan territory. Through the window, he could see a young black woman about Zara's age working on a laptop, wearing the same expression of intense concentration that he had seen on Zara's face when she studied his acquisition offer. For a moment, he imagined walking into that coffee shop and introducing himself. Imagined the woman looking up with polite interest, extending her hand in greeting. Imagined himself taking that hand without hesitation, treating her with the same respect he would automatically show to any white man in a $1,000 suit. The image seemed both revolutionary and impossibly simple. Alexander pulled out his phone and began typing a text message to Zara. He wrote and deleted 17 different versions over the course of an hour, each one feeling either too defensive, too presumptuous, or too small for the magnitude of what had happened between them. Finally, he settled on the truth. I was wrong about everything, not just the business deal, not just Meridian, but everything that matters. You deserve better than the man I was raised to be, and I'm sorry that my father's failures became your pain. If you're willing, I'd like the chance to try again. Not as Alexander Kane of Kane Financial, but as someone learning to see the world the way my grandmother's granddaughter taught me it should be seen. No agenda, no expectations, just the chance to prove that some people can change. Alexander. He stared at the message for another 10 minutes, thumb hovering over the send button. Sending it meant admitting that everything he had believed about himself, his family, and his place in the world was built on a foundation of inherited cruelty. It meant acknowledging that a woman he had dismissed as insignificant had more wisdom in her little finger than he had in his entire privileged existence. It meant choosing to be vulnerable with someone who had every right to destroy him. But not sending it meant staying exactly who he was. A man so terrified of being wrong that he would sacrifice love, connection, and basic humanity to protect an ego that wasn't even his own. Alexander thought about Zara's eyes in the amber emergency lighting, the way she had looked at him when she said, "We're all just people." He thought about the quiet strength in her voice when she told him about her grandmother, the grace she had shown to Jessica, the patience she had offered him even after he had treated her with unconscious cruelty. He thought about the man he could become if he had the courage to let go of the man he had been taught to be. At 3:47 p.m., standing on a Brooklyn street corner, surrounded by the kind of diverse, bustling life his father had taught him to see as beneath his notice, Alexander Kane pressed send. Then he sat down on a nearby bench and waited to discover whether mercy was something that could be earned, or if it was only something that could be given freely by someone brave enough to see potential in the most unlikely places. His phone sat silent in his hands, but for the first time in 14 years, Alexander Kane felt like he was exactly where he belonged, uncertain, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of someone else's grace. The city moved around him in all its chaotic beauty, and he waited to learn if redemption was possible for a man who had spent his entire life learning all the wrong lessons about what it meant to be human. Zara was sitting in her grandmother's kitchen in Detroit when Alexander's message arrived at 3:47 p.m. She had driven the 6 hours from Manhattan in a single stretch, needing the familiar comfort of the woman who had taught her everything about dignity, grace, and the difference between justice and revenge. Rose Williams, 87 years old and still sharp as surgical steel, was making sweet tea and watching her granddaughter with the patient wisdom of someone who had seen heartbreak before. "You gonna read that message, baby girl? Or just stare at your phone until it catches fire?" Zara looked up, startled. "How did you know someone texted me?" "Because you got that look on your face like the world just shifted under your feet. Same look you had when you got your first big client, when you bought your first building, when you realized you were powerful enough to help people instead of just surviving them." Zara opened the message and read it slowly, twice. Her grandmother watched the emotions play across her face. Surprise, skepticism, and then something softer that Rose recognized immediately. "What's he saying?" "That he was wrong, that he wants to try again, not as a businessman, but as," Zara paused, reading the message once more, "as someone learning to see the world the way my grandmother's granddaughter taught him it should be seen." Rose was quiet for a long moment, stirring honey into her tea with deliberate slowness. "You know what I think about second chances, baby girl? That they're earned, not given." "No." Rose's voice was gentle but firm. "That they're gifts. You can't earn a second chance any more than you can earn love or forgiveness or grace. They're things one person chooses to give another person, usually when they don't deserve it." She sat down across from Zara at the small kitchen table, where 3 generations of Williams women had made their most important decisions. "The question isn't whether he deserves another chance. The question is whether you're brave enough to give him one." 3 days later, Alexander received a single text message. "Bryant Park. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Come alone. Z." He arrived 30 minutes early and found a bench near the fountain, watching families and couples and solitary readers populate the small urban oasis. A food truck nearby was serving coffee and pastries, and Alexander noticed the easy way the vendor chatted with each customer. No hierarchy, no judgment, just human beings treating each other with basic kindness. At exactly 3 p.m., he saw her. Zara walked toward him wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like a graduate student than someone who controlled billions of dollars. But there was something different about her posture, something settled and sure that hadn't been there during their first meeting. She sat on the bench beside him, not too close but not distant either, and for a moment they simply watched the city move around them. "I almost didn't come," she said finally. "I wouldn't have blamed you. My grandmother thinks I'm crazy for giving you another chance." Alexander felt his heart sink. "And you agree with her?" "Actually, no. She thinks I'm crazy because she believes you already had your second chance that night in the hotel lobby, and this would technically be your third chance. Possibly your fourth, depending on how we're counting." "Despite everything," Alexander smiled, "your grandmother sounds like she doesn't miss much. 87 years of watching people make the same mistakes over and over will do that to you." Zara turned to look at him directly. She also said something else. She said that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone prove that they're better than their worst moment. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a young father teach his daughter to feed pigeons while his partner captured the moment on their phone. "I fired Thompson," Alexander said suddenly. "What?" "My head of research, the one who told me about the Meridian connection. I fired him and disbanded the entire research team that specializes in background investigations." Alexander's voice was steady, resolved. "Kane Financial will no longer investigate potential partners as if they're enemy combatants. We'll do business the way it should be done, based on merit, character, and mutual respect." Zara absorbed this, understanding the magnitude of what he was describing. That's a significant operational change. It's a complete philosophical overhaul, and honestly, it's terrifying. I have no idea how to evaluate people without assuming they're trying to take advantage of me. You could try assuming they're human beings with their own interests and motivations, most of which have nothing to do with you. Alexander laughed, a sound with genuine humor in it. "Revolutionary concept." A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the sounds of the city, children playing, conversations in multiple languages, the distant hum of traffic that formed the backdrop of New York life. Zara, Alexander said quietly, I need you to know something. What happened between us? It changed me. Not just my business practices or my assumptions about people, but something fundamental about who I am. You held up a mirror and forced me to see myself as I really was, and it was devastating and necessary, and I will be grateful for it for the rest of my life. Even though it cost you $4 billion, especially because it cost me $4 billion, I needed to learn that some things matter more than money. I just wish I could have learned it without putting you through the pain of my ignorance first. Zara was quiet for a long moment, watching an elderly couple walk past hand in hand, their love visible in the way they moved together like two parts of the same whole. Can I tell you a secret? She said finally. Please. The acquisition offer was never really about Kane Financial. I mean, it was a legitimate deal, and the terms were real, but she paused, choosing her words carefully. I'd been watching your company for months, reading about you, studying your approach to business. You intrigued me. Intrigued you how? You were different from your father, at least on paper. More charitable giving, more diverse hiring practices, more progressive investment strategies. I thought maybe you had learned from his mistakes instead of repeating them. Alexander felt something twist in his chest. But I hadn't. No, you had. In all the ways that show up in annual reports and press releases, you just hadn't learned the most important lesson of all, which is that treating people with dignity isn't a business strategy. It's just what decent human beings do. What do you think makes someone truly worthy of love? Their worst moment or their willingness to grow from it? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear about second chances that changed your life. Zara reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Not the leather portfolio that had started this whole journey, but something simpler. What's that? A new offer. Not for an acquisition this time, for a partnership. 50-50 ownership of a new venture capital firm focused on investing in companies owned by people who traditionally get overlooked by firms like the one you inherited. Alexander stared at the folder as if it might explode. You want to start a business together? I want to build something that proves it's possible to make money while making the world a little more fair. I want to create opportunities for people who deserve them, but never get them. And I want to do it with someone who understands how easy it is to be wrong about people and how important it is to keep trying to be better. She extended the folder toward him, but this time, she also extended her hand. Partners? She asked, her eyes holding his with steady warmth. Alexander looked at her outstretched hand, the same hand he had refused to shake 3 weeks ago in a moment of inherited prejudice that had nearly cost him everything. But this time, he saw it for what it really was. An offer of trust from someone who had every reason to withhold it, a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of his worst mistake. He took her hand in both of his, holding it gently, feeling the strength and warmth of her fingers, understanding for the first time in his life that true power lay not in dominance, but in connection. Partners, he said, and the word felt like a promise, a prayer, and a new beginning all at once. As their hands clasped in Bryant Park, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of New York City, neither of them noticed that they had become the kind of couple they had watched earlier. Two people moving together like parts of the same whole, their love visible in the way they looked at each other like they had found something worth holding on to forever. 6 months later, Williams Kane Ventures would fund its first portfolio of companies, each one owned by someone who had been told they didn't belong in boardrooms or corner offices. 2 years later, their success rate would be twice the industry average, proving that when you invest in people's humanity instead of just their potential for profit, extraordinary things become possible. But in that moment, in Bryant Park on a perfect October afternoon, they were just Alexander and Zara, two people who had learned that love sometimes grows in the most unlikely soil, watered by humility, strengthened by forgiveness, and rooted in the revolutionary idea that everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are. The marble floors of the Meridian Hotel had witnessed the refusal of a handshake that nearly destroyed everything. But Bryant Park's autumn leaves had witnessed something infinitely more powerful. The moment when two people chose to see beyond their assumptions and build something beautiful together. Some love stories begin with lightning strikes and fairy tale romance. Others begin with the courage to admit you were wrong and the grace to offer someone a chance to be better than their worst moment. Theirs was definitely the latter, and it was perfect.
If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.